I feel like the same skills that case officers use are skills that are important for parenting as well. So one of those is just being a good listener, right? And being a good listener in the context of being able to assess the right time. So a case officer is trying to assess the right time for a pitch, right? To pitch to the person like, hey, I want you to spy for me, right?
It's a big pitch. It's a big pitch.
And it's a big pitch. So it takes lots of time where you're listening to them and putting time into them until you get to that point where you assess that they are comfortable with you and they're open with you, right? With kids, it's the same thing. You need to spend all this time listening to them and assessing along the way their openness to you so you can figure out that right moment of like, we're going to have the talk today.
So, and let's be clear, because, you know, being a good listener in culture, in pop culture, that means something completely different than what we're talking about.
Right. It's not passive.
It's not empathetic. You're not trying to be a good listener so you can be a good person. You're not trying to be a good listener so you can be a good friend. In this case, we're not trying to be good listeners so we can be good parents. That's not what we're doing. We're trying to be proactive listeners so that we can find the right time to introduce a difficult concept, a difficult topic.
Yeah.
It's very operationally driven, and that's how case officers use it, right? Good listener, I mean, that's something you'll get from a yoga class. You'll get that from like an influencer online who's trying to sell hair products.
And
who knows what?
It could apply to the other things, but definitely in this context, the hard conversation context, it is not those things.
Right.
Yeah.
It is a process by which you listen so that you can assess, to your point.
Yeah.
You can gain enough evidence, verbal evidence, nonverbal evidence, life experience, context. You can assess when is the right time to bring up a topic. And it's funny because we're talking about when to bring up the topic of sex with our 10-year-old homeschooled son.
Yeah.
But the reason we're having this conversation is not because of him. No. It's because of his 6-year-old sister who makes sex jokes like she's a 35-year-old man. Right? So it's interesting because we're assessing for one person, but we know that this train is coming.
Yeah.
But we don't, not because of him. If we were to just assess from him, it's years out.
Yeah.
He doesn't talk about sex. He doesn't show much of an interest in sex. He still thinks kissing is gross.
Yeah.
Right? He talks about wanting to marry a nice girl and have a family and have kids and be a dad himself. So there's certainly evidence that he's a heterosexual kid.
Yeah.
But it's not like he talks about his sexuality at all.
No.
It is interesting. Like, is it going to happen all at once? Like, is it going to be 10-year-old is cute and 11 years old is cute and 12-year-old is what? Now we're talking to like a horn dog. Like, what's it going to be like?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I mean, and it's not, just like puberty itself, right? It's not standard. You can't standardize these things. So the only way to approach it is to make these constant assessments along the way, to really be paying attention.
Now, when case officers assess, when field officers assess an asset, and it's not just case officers. Anybody who comes in contact with a case in CIA, they're all asked to weigh in on their assessment.
Right.
Even the analyst who's only reading the intel report, who never meets the person, is still asked to assess the case. So what are some of the data points that you use when you're assessing a person, a case, an individual, a situation?
So, we're always looking for case progression, right? Because that's what matters. So we're looking to make sure that the person is comfortable with the case officer, that the person is being honest in the things because some people are looking to be spies, right? Some people are putting false information out there because they want to be recruited and paid for information that they don't actually have access to. So we're looking, for... are they being honest with the case officer? Do they trust the case officer? Do they have vulnerabilities in those situations that we could, or motivations that we could, leverage when the time comes to slowly build them up to a point where they are comfortable giving us the secrets that we're looking for.
So this idea of progress over time.
Yeah.
You want them on day 5 to be more open, more cooperative, more compliant than they were on day 0.
Absolutely.
And it's funny because one of the things that I was going to say is we're looking for consistency. Consistency in progression, that's one thing.
Yeah.
But also consistency in areas of interest, consistency in vulnerabilities, consistency in levels of interest.
Yeah.
And it's really fascinating because when you apply that same concept in espionage, that all sounds sexy, right? Let's find the nuclear scientist who drinks too much, right?
Has
Who's
a
working
gambling
on
problem.
and he's working on a nuclear missile program, and then let's see that case progress.
Yeah.
It's way less sexy, but even more impactful in many ways when you apply it to your family, to your kids, right? Or to dating, for crying out loud.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Do you see progression?
Yes.
Do you see consistency? Right? Do you see the promise of future growth? Because if you don't see those things during your assessment over time, not during your instantaneous assumption,
Right.
Because assessment and assumption often get confused.
Yeah.
We're not saying what do you assume about the person. We're saying what do you assess from actual evidence that you collect in your interactions with them. And do you see that progression, that consistency, and that value?
Yeah. And it's, if you talk about the dating world, it's more than just the first 3 dates, because maybe you have your amazing first 3 dates and you have drinks and you're having a great time and everything is wonderful. It's really more like on date 10, right? Like have your last 10 dates progressed to a point where you feel like that person trusts you, where you feel like that person listens to you and you are giving them the kind of feedback that shows that you were listening to them. So I know, when we started dating, the first, we met at work, we met at orientation. And then the first time you came to my apartment was maybe like 2 months after we had met. And the thing you brought me the first time you came to my apartment to visit was a bag of cherries, because I had mentioned to you that it was cherry season and cherries were my favorite because they were only available when they're in season. And
that was the reason I told you. That was the reason I told you. But I mean, come on, like the first time I went to a girl's apartment, I bring cherries. There's so much immature innuendo there, right?
Well, unfortunately for you, my mom was staying with me at
the time. That's true. It didn't work. It didn't work well. She ate the cherries, which was really, really uncomfortable to me.
But then over time, you showed consistently that you had been paying attention to things that I had said. And just little, acts of service or little gifts that you would give me built that trust for me that, oh, Andy's paying attention. Andy cares. That's how I equated it in my mind, right?
And I did care, and I was paying attention. I thought you were super interesting.
Oh, that's
and I
very
thought
sweet.
you were super fun, and you were an awesome escape from all things CIA, even though you were still a CIA thing too, right? It's funny because you give this very sweet example, and when you were explaining this, where my mind went was to a very raunchy example.
Of course.
And I've got to say it because I know I'm not alone. I was always the guy who stayed with the wrong girl because the sex was good. And that goes, talk about assessment, right?
Yeah.
Like, she looked good naked. She was good in bed. She was dumb as a hammer in public. She was not the kind of person you want to introduce your mom to. Yeah. Your friends all looked at you like, why are you wasting your time? Like, you could do so much better. But for you, as the dude, 28, or not 28, I was with you. I was past it by then.
Yeah.
24, 25, 21, right? I didn't want to work hard. I definitely didn't want to work as hard as it takes to find a true life partner.
Yeah.
So the lazy way was to find the good enough partner. And, there's a lot of guys out there who do that. We work just hard enough to find a partner who's good enough.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, what I think I find with a lot of people now that we're in our early 40s is that what was good enough to them when they were in their 20s, it's not good enough anymore.
Yeah.
And that's why you find them moving on to second marriages, or you find them going through their first round of divorce.
Right.
Which is strange to be at a season in our lives where we're being invited to second weddings instead of first weddings.
Yeah.
But that's where my mind went, because that's a failure to assess.
Right.
I was failing to assess the situation. There was no progress. Yep. There was no growth. There was no, outside of the consistency of being good in bed,
right.
The other thing that was consistent was all bad.
Yeah.
Bad conversation, not enjoyable times in public, no approval from my social circles.
Yeah.
Like I wasn't tuned in. I wasn't doing a proper assessment.
Right. And that's if you were looking for your assessment to be, will this be a long-term partner, right? Because if your assessment is, will this person meet my needs for, the next 6 months, then maybe that was a proper assessment you were making.
Way to validate my bad
Your bad
single bachelor decisions.
Well, I have my own decisions too that will remain locked away in a closet.
But man, could you imagine those, talk about hard conversations. If I would have had any one of those bad fits and I would have had an honest conversation with them, it would have gone horribly wrong. So that's why we find 1,001 excuses to break up with boyfriends and girlfriends. The whole "it's not you, it's me" thing is like the worst breakup plan ever, but we all use it because we're just trying to avoid the hard conversation.
Although
because it really is you.
I do remember a conversation in our history where it was definitely a "it's not me, it's you" conversation.
That's true. You want to bring it up? We'll jump right into that because that may have been our first hard conversation.
Hard conversation. So, when you broke up with me.
Yep. After you had been bringing me dinner, too many second plates of dinner.
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know. We were dating. I don't think we were living together. Were we living together?
No, we had been dating maybe 6 weeks or so.
Oh, yeah.
Officially
So very
dating.
early on.
It was very early
and
on. Yeah, it didn't take you long to make that assessment.
I was very into you because you were smart, you were bold, you were confident, you were intelligent, you were capable, you were a strong woman. I really respect strong women. I feel like the world is a better place because of strong women, right? And for sure, I was raised in a household full of strong women. So it was a very natural thing for me to be attracted to your strong woman nature. And when we were dating early on, and you were a strong woman in public, but then whenever we got in private, watching a movie, eating dinner, going on a date, you were like demure.
I was the little woman in private.
You were the little woman. And the big woman, the hashtag lady boss in public, and you were like Little House on the Prairie in private. And I was like, I didn't like this. This consistency is not working for me.
Yeah. And it was because, I'd come from a family where my female role models did everything for the men. And I had just come out of a long-term relationship where that was the dynamic, and that was the dynamic with his parents as well. And so that was the example that I was emulating these women who I adored. But it wasn't really me, and you knew that. And what I think is so powerful about that hard conversation was it was a hard conversation. I was completely heartbroken. I didn't fully, I knew you were unhappy, but I don't think I fully knew your feelings for me at the time because it was so early on.
I didn't know my feelings for you at the time. Yeah.
And so, but what happened was because you took the step, right? If you had not had that conversation with me, if you had avoided it, we would have continued down the same path, and you would have continued to have been unhappy, and maybe we would have broken up eventually because of it, or maybe we would have continued and then you just would have not had the partner that you wanted. I wouldn't have grown. But because you had that hard conversation with me, we broke up for quite a while. And I took that conversation as an assessment of myself, and I grew. So I took all of that time and all of that feedback that you gave me, as hard as it was to hear, and I ruminated on it, and I figured out, what can I do to make these changes, right? At first, I was very... at first I pushed back. You remember, right?
We haven't, you're jumping to the end of the story, right? Because I saw that you were being weak in private and strong in public. And then the actual conversation that you keep referencing, that's what I'm saying, you're jumping to the end.
Oh, yeah.
No one knows the conversation.
Oh, sorry, everybody.
Is we were having dinner. We were watching a movie. We were having dinner.
Yeah.
You brought me dinner, like you have done 100 times before. And I asked you multiple times, like, don't bring me my dinner. Like, I'll get my own happy ass up, and I'll go get my own food. In fact, sit down and let me bring you dinner. But you kept bringing me dinner. And then I think the straw that broke the camel's back was we're watching this movie. You had just sat down to your own dinner, and I was mostly done with mine, and I was talking about how good the food was. And then you didn't even take a bite of your own food. You then stood right back up and came over and got my plate and took it away to go get me more food. And I was like, I cannot handle this. And that was when I told you. I was like, this is This is not what I'm interested in. I do not want a partner who's going to wait on me. You're not a waitress.
Yeah.
You're a partner, right? We're supposed to do this thing together. And I feel like right now you're putting yourself second. And how are we ever going to be on the same page if I put you first and you put yourself second?
Yeah.
How are we ever going to see eye to eye on this, right? Like, let me take care of you. You can take care of you. And then anything that's left over, we can use that to focus on me, because I don't need what you need. I'm not a needy person. I don't need attention. I don't have anxiety. I don't have low energy. I'm not an introvert, right? I have excess resources in these areas. So let me invest them in you. I don't need you going into debt with your resources.
Yeah.
I don't need you, exacerbating your anxiety. I don't need you running your energy levels even lower by trying to pretend to be this little Latina woman for her big Latina boy.
Taking care of my man.
That's not what I need, right? When I need you to take care of me, it'll count. And you've taken care of me a lot in our life.
Yeah.
I've been super sick and you've taken care of me. And you've brought me back from places of deep depression. Like you've been there when I needed you. And the hard conversation we had in that moment was, I don't need you to wait on me hand and foot.
Yeah.
And that was not something you wanted to hear.
No.
I recall you yelling in my face, "This is the way I am.
That was my response.
This is who I am." And that's how we ended up breaking up. Because I was like, well, then I don't want to have any part of you.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, so that was definitely my answer. But that conversation was the catalyst to
what
a
happened to
really
you?
big change.
Yeah, so what happened? Because
I went home. I cried for a while, like a week. I talked to my mom a lot. And then I realized that you were right and I was being obstinate. And so the first thing I did was I found you in the hallway and I made sure that I solidified the connection with you because I didn't want to lose you. I wanted another chance and I knew it, but I couldn't tell you that. So I found you in the hallway and I remember it was a stairwell and I ran after you. I grabbed your arm and I was like, it's really important to me that we stay friends, right? Like you have a positive influence on my life and it's really important to me that we continue to be friends. And I find a lot of growth from my interactions with you. And if you're okay with that, that would make me happy. And you were like, yeah, and you were great. So that was the first step.
Cute.
Because
crazy, but cute.
Because I had a plan at that point. Like I knew, right? Like the case officer knows they're going to make their pitch down the line, right? So I knew down the line I was going to make a pitch. So I just needed to keep that first contact going. And then I started really reflecting on what you said, and I started putting in the work of not being demure, of making sure I put myself first. And I started going out by myself, which I hadn't been, right? And then we had the same circle of friends, so you would see me out and you would see the difference in my demeanor over time. So over time, you were able to make the assessment by me intentionally changing my behavior that I was really making a change. Right. I was really working on it. So then when I reached back out and started to make passes at you, you were more open to those. Gosh.
When you showed up at my apartment with a deep cut top blouse.
And the Transformers 2 movie.
And a DVD. That's how we age. That's how we date ourselves right there. How could I say no?
Yeah.
But hard conversations.
Yep.
Hard. And now, we've been married 13 years. We've known each other more than 16 years. Mm-hmm. So now, hard conversations are something we do all the time.
On a regular basis. Yeah. We know it has to get done.
Yeah. And we don't really shy away from it. In fact, I think most people think that we're arguing when we're just talking.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting because, there are times when we'll be with a group of people or we'll be talking and we'll have different opinions. And I have to remind myself that I am with you and not with my, parents or extended family. Like I'm with you. So when I disagree, I need to say it. I need to speak up. And if that's the beginning of a hard conversation, that's okay. Yeah. It's necessary.
If you like this short clip, make sure you click here to see the next clip or here to see the full podcast episode.